everyone, welcome to my channel if you are new, and welcome back if you're a returning viewer. It's great to have you here again. My name is Anna. I am a knitter and maker and I live in Seattle, Washington, and today we're just going to be doing a little knit and chat video. I have my knitting, I hope you have yours, and I'm just going to be answering some questions that some of you left for me in the comments of my last video and over on Instagram. Got some fun questions. Just thought it would be nice for us to chat and for you to get to know me a little bit better. So I've broken the questions up into two sections. There's the knitting related question section and then more of a personal life question section. I'll do the knitting first, so if that's what you're interested in, you can get that and then click away if you're not as interested in my personal life, which is totally fine. But yeah, that's what we're gonna get into today. I got some really fun questions. I'm excited to answer them for you and just do some mindless stockinette knitting. I'm working on the Museau by apt.atelier. This is a new cast on that you haven't seen yet. So I'm just doing the yoke and the increases, and I'm using Hillesvåg Ask, which is a 100% Norwegian lamb's wool in this really beautiful petrol blue color. So that's what I'm working on. I'm also wearing my Seasons cardigan by Ozetta, which I finished on New Year's Day of this year, and I really like it. It's super cozy. It's starting to get a little bit more chilly here in Seattle. It's starting to get quite cold in the evenings and at night, so it's chilly in the mornings, and I'm really enjoying snuggling up into my woolens a little bit more. So that is all of the introduction that I think we need. I'm just gonna knit around and around and around and answer some of your questions. So the first question that I have is from Lynn Z. She left me this question and asked how I got into knitting. I learned how to knit when I was a child. I don't remember how old I was, and I think it was my great-grandmother who taught me, but it probably also could have been my mom. My great-grandmother was a really big crocheter. She crocheted beautiful Afghans. And my mom has always been a knitter as long as I can remember. So my earliest memory of knitting, I was probably 8 or 9 years old. And we used to go to the public library all the time and check out books, like after school. And I would always go into the nonfiction section and look at the craft books. And I checked out a craft book, and I remember that the first thing I remember knitting for myself was a fried egg. And I don't know what book this is from, and I don't know why I chose to knit the egg, but I was using these long straight needles and I started knitting this egg, and it was like kind of irregularly shaped. It was like a play food kind of toy. And I started knitting it and I got about halfway through, and then I stopped because I didn't know how to do the decreases. So you had to do some increases to get the shape, and I did those kind of okay, and then I didn't know how to do the decreases. So I think I ended up frogging it, but that's my earliest knitting memory. And yeah, I think I was probably 7 or 8 years old, maybe a little bit older than that, but so I learned to knit when I was a child. And I've been knitting kind of sporadically ever since then. So I went through a phase when I was in middle school where I was doing a lot of crochet, and then I did some knitting in high school. And then I really seriously picked my knitting back up again after I graduated from college. So I think it was 2018, one of my nieces was born and I knit her a baby blanket. And that's probably the first big project that I did when I started knitting again, kind of in earnest, and I haven't really stopped knitting since then. So that is when I started knitting. I've been knitting for my whole life, and I've always been surrounded by crafty people. So, but yeah, I would say I've started knitting pretty seriously in 2018. So it's been 4.5, almost 5 years now that I've been knitting more regularly. And I love it, obviously. Woven Heart asked me what other kind of creative stuff I like to do. I love to be creative. It's like one of my favorite things in the whole world. I would say in order of like how much I do these different crafts, I do a lot of sewing. I've been doing a lot of sewing in the past, since the past 2 or 3 years. I really like to do dyeing experiments. So yarn dyeing, not like mostly, all of these are just for fun things. I know how to crochet, and I've done some small crochet projects. I like to paint and draw. I'm not great at it, and I would love to get better. I'm really inspired by Taylor from Taylor Seeking Cozy. She just came back after a long hiatus from her podcast, but she was showing in one of her recent videos a lot of different painting and drawing things that she's been doing, and that was really inspiring to me. I like miniatures. I was really big into dollhouses when I was younger. I mean, I've been doing creative things for my whole life. I grew up in a very creative household and just I am a creative person. And so it's always been a part of my life, but I loved my dollhouse when I was younger, and I had dolls, and I would sew clothes for my dolls. And I made a quilt when I was like, I don't know, probably 8 for my dolls. My mom made me a quilt for Christmas, and then I used the scraps from my quilt to make a quilt for my dolls. So miniatures, I love to bake. I just really love to do all sorts of creative things, and I would love to do more creative things in the future. But I would say the biggest creative things that I do are probably knitting and sewing, with lots of other fun things sprinkled in. There's just, I don't know what else I want to add to my creative practice. I think I want to get back into miniatures a little bit. I'm intrigued by the idea of spinning, but I don't know. I feel like I would rather be knitting with yarn than making something with yarn than spending the time making the yarn. I don't know. I'm sure I would love to try it. I had a drop spindle when I was younger, and I remember making some yarn on my drop spindle, but I don't know what happened to it. And I think my mom probably has it now, but I just love being creative. I love art and music and textile arts, and it's just like the best part of life to me is having the opportunity to make things. It just like brings me unimaginable amounts of joy, and I love it so much. Dana D asked me how much time a day I spend knitting. It varies, obviously. I think it varies for everyone, but I would say I probably average, like on a good day, like on a work day where I'm working from home, I probably knit 3 or 4 hours in the evenings usually. I mean, I don't have any children. I don't have a lot of responsibilities. I don't really exercise, so this is like my big evening activity. Or if I am going into work, I knit on the commute in and out, which is like an hour and a half of time, and then I'll work on some in the evening. So I would say most days I'm knitting between 3 and 4 hours a day. There were last year, I probably had a lot more knitting time than that. I was in graduate school, and in 2020 as well, during COVID, all of my classes were online. So I would just knit in class. And so I was probably spending like 8 hours a day knitting. But I think I'm really happy with the amount of time I have to knit now. And I mean, I'm very lucky that I have as much time as I do to be knitting. So yeah, I would say I probably knit about 3 or 4 hours a day, which is a lot, but, I'm really lucky to have that time. Everly Cower and Lauren S. both asked me some questions about needles. So what my favorite needles and yarn brands are, and if I prefer metal or wooden needles. I mean, I'm definitely a metal needle girl. I really prefer to use metal needles. I don't really like to use wooden needles. I feel like they slow me down. I just don't like the feel of them in my hands. As far as what my favorite needles are, I am an Addi Click girl, so I use the Addi interchangeable system. It kind of just happened that way. So in 2018, after I'd knit that first baby blanket, my husband realized that I was like kind of getting into knitting. And so he bought me an interchangeable knitting needle set for Christmas, which was an incredible gift and has paid dividends. I've used it so much over the past couple of years. And he bought the Addis because that's what my mom uses, and she recommended them to him. And I really like them. I really like the Click system. It's super easy to switch the cables in and out. I don't find that they really pop out ever, which is what I've heard with like the twist on cables for needles. The only thing I don't love about Addis is that I can only use Addis with my Addi cables. Like I couldn't try another kind of needle and use the same cables. And so as far as interchangeables go, I use the Addis. I have the Addi Turbo set, which is kind of the standard, I think, most affordable metal needle set from Addi. And then as I've knit more and more, I bought a couple more tips. So I knit mostly with 3.5 and 4 millimeter needles. So I've bought an extra set of tips of each of those. So I have 2 tips, 3.5, 2 tips, 4. And when I bought the extra tips, I bought the Rocket, which are a little bit pointier. I do like a really pointy needle. I find it helps me pick the yarn up really quickly and I can knit faster. So I think if I lost all of my interchangeables and had to buy a new set, I would buy the Addi Rocket set so that all the needles were a little pointier, but generally it's not been a problem. I really like the Addis. I feel like they hold up really well. They also have a great warranty. So I had some, from my original Addi Turbo set, the 3.5 and the 4 millimeter needles, I was knitting on them so much that I wore like the silver plating off of the needle, and it was showing like the brass metal that's underneath the plating. And you can just send them into Addy and they will send you free tips or send you a replacement for free, which I think is incredible customer service. And their US headquarters is actually really close to where I live, so it was super fast turnover. I just paid shipping, so I paid $4 and got like 2 brand new sets of needle tips. And I also had a broken cord that they replaced for me as well. So really great customer service. I really liked the Addy needles that I have. I also, however, I do like to knit with small circulars when I am working on a smaller circumference project. I really don't care to knit in magic loop. So I've, over the years, kind of bought a 16-inch fixed circulars in most sizes. And I usually just get those from my creative reuse center. And so I have some wooden ones that are fine. I have some metal ones, but that gives me the opportunity to try other needle brands. So I have like a set of Hayahayas that I like. I've tried the Chiaogu and I actually don't really like them, which I think is kind of controversial. I bought a pair, like a 9-inch circular Chiaogu with the red cord that's really popular, and I did not like it. Like I just felt like it was too stiff and I couldn't move the way I wanted to. Like the Addy cables are quite bendy, which some people like, some people don't. I don't find it a problem. So I've tried a couple different needle brands. I would really like to try Licca needles. They have either the driftwood or they have the really gorgeous copper set that are really pretty. I also knit these, and my Addies are the 5-inch tips, not the 4-inch. I don't like shorter needle tips because the needles kind of like dig into my hand. I've noticed that with some of my 16-inch circulars, that the needle, where the needle and the cord join, it like digs into my hand and it's kind of uncomfortable. So that was a long spiel about needles, but I use the Addy Click system. I love them. I think they're really great, very reliable. I love the customer service, and I would definitely buy them again if I needed a new thing of interchangeables. I don't think I would ever buy another full set of interchangeables, but I will probably just keep adding on tips. Like I think I might buy a 4.5 millimeter, a set of 4.5 tips, because that's the size I've been using a lot recently. So that's that on needles. This is kind of builds on the previous question. Lauren asked me what my favorite fiber blend was for yarns and what do I like so much about it. And then the previous question, they also asked me some of my favorite yarns. I generally prefer to just knit with 100% wool. I think it's like just the best. It's very sturdy, it's very warm, but it isn't too warm. Like it's very temperature regulating. I find wool to just be strong and reliable, and I really just like it. I really like 100% wool. I think it's like, it also makes me feel like I'm connected with like generations of knitters in the past who also predominantly knit with 100% wool. So it makes me feel like I'm carrying the craft on in that way, which I don't know if it's silly, but that's how I feel. It makes me feel more connected to other knitters. So yeah, I really just like to knit with 100% wool. I know it's boring, but that's what I prefer to knit with. I also really like to knit with alpaca. It's very smooth and lovely. I do like a mohair, but I'm not the kind of person that knits with mohair in every project. Not even every project that I make that calls for mohair. I don't use mohair. I think I'm on my second project that I have knit with mohair, and I've knit a lot of projects that call for mohair, and I just choose to use a different yarn. If you ever if you want me to talk about yarn substitutions in a video, I'd be happy to do that. But for the most part, I knit with wool because it's my favorite. It's just the best. And there's so many different kinds of 100% wool blends and spinning methods. And like, it's just like the world of yarn is so vast. And there are so many lovely things to try. So yeah, I generally prefer wool. And some of my favorite yarns, I love a Lopi. I don't know, I know people have hard time with Lopi and it can be scratchy and it can be a bit uncomfortable, but I just find it so enjoyable to knit with. Either Let Lopi or Plotu Lopi. I find it so enjoyable to knit with. I love how versatile it is. I love that you can knit Lopi at like any gauge from like a 23 stitch gauge to like a 16 stitch gauge. It's so versatile. It softens up a lot with wear. I really like Lopi. I think it's kind of really special and magical. It comes in a million colors, it's super affordable, very accessible. So Lopi's great. If you haven't knit with it before, try some socks, you know? If you're worried about like the scratch level, and I don't know, maybe some of you also love Lopi, but I just think it's incredible, and I think it's worth your money for sure. Another yarn that I think is really great that we have pretty readily available in the US is Patton's Classic Wool. It's just 100% wool worsted weight yarn. You can get it at like any big box craft store. You can't, they don't really carry it in yarn stores, but you can get it at like a Michael's or a Joann or a Hobby Lobby. Yeah. And it's 100% wool. It's a worsted spun, so it's really smooth, really soft, but really strong. And it's super versatile. It's another one that you can knit at like a lot of different gauges. They have a ton of different colors if you're shopping online. And I just think it's like a really great workhorse yarn. I've knit with Cascade 220 a couple of times and I really like that. But often I knit with reclaimed wool, so it's kind of hard to recommend that. So those are some of my favorite yarns, and I just love wool. It's special to me. Evalie Cower asked me what are my knitting related dreams. She asked about dream festivals to visit, dream yarns, dream books, etc. This was a fun question to think about. I think as far as dream festivals to visit, I'm not a big festival person. I find them a little bit overwhelming. I really liked going to Fiber Fusion Northwest here in the Seattle area in the spring. But I don't know that I would ever travel super far for a knitting festival. I don't really have any desire to go to Rhinebeck or any other like large knitting festival. But I think they're a fun opportunity to just see and touch and experience new things. So I'll probably keep going to Fiber Fusion every year that we have it here, and any other local yarn festivals that pop up, I'd be happy to go to, but I'm not going to travel for one. As far as like dream yarns and books and other things, I actually would really love to go visit the Spin Cycle Factory, which is not super far from where I live. It's in Bellingham, Washington, which is about 2.5 hours from me. I'm not sure that I ever really want to knit with Spin Cycle. It's incredibly expensive. And I just don't know how I feel about the color changing yarn, but I would just love to go see how, like, visit their factory and just see their making methodology. When we went to Scandinavia in the spring, we went to the Hillesvåg factory, which was like a dream for me. That was a dream, and I'm so glad that I got to go. It was incredible. But they had like machines going in there processing the wool and everything, and it was just really cool to watch and see how that goes. So I'd love to go up to the Spin Cycle factory. That's like a pretty achievable dream for me. I would love to go. I really liked, like I said, I really loved going to the Hillesvåg mill in Norway. This spring, everyone was so nice. There was so much yarn and just wool everywhere. It was amazing. I would love to go to more yarn factories, either in Norway or in the UK or other places in Scandinavia, like Rauma or Sennisgarn or Rennie or Jameson and Smith, or any of the like Worth Mill, any of the British or Scottish or Norwegian or Danish yarn mills. I love a yarn mill, and I love a factory store. So that would be a big dream for me. As far as dream yarns, if you followed me for a while, you know I love a good unspun yarn. So probably I would love to try some Nutiden. I know it's very popular, and it's just kind of expensive to ship to where I live. So I don't think I'm going to use it anytime soon, but that would be a fun yarn to try. Another yarn that I am actually planning to order sometime soon-ish is from the McCausland mill, which is in Canada. I learned about this yarn through Inga from Knitting Traditions. She did a yarn swap with a woman in Canada, and the woman sent her some McCausland yarn, and Inga was talking about it. And it's really affordable. They have both 2-ply, 3-ply, and then they also have unspun plates where available. So I would love to order some of their unspun yarns. Other dream yarns. I don't know. There's just so much beautiful yarn to try, and I have quite a lot of it. So I think I'm going to work through my stash before I start dreaming of other yarns. But probably the only dream yarn I could like name off the top of my head is Nutiden. Annika K asked me a question about Lopi, so this is also timely. She asked why I chose Let Lopi to make socks with, and like why I wouldn't use a more conventional sock yarn. Generally, I try to knit as sustainably as I can, so I try not to knit with nylon or artificial fibers in my yarns. I also try not to use superwash yarn. So that's why I chose Let Lopi. It's so incredibly strong because of the way that it's spun and the way that the fiber is. It's super warm, and I just wanted like something cozy, and I love Lopi. So that was a combination of why I chose Lopi to make socks with, was like this the characteristics of the yarn make it a really great non-superwash sock yarn. They're not socks that I'm ever really planning to wear in shoes, so I'm not really worried about getting holes in them. And I just love knitting with Lopi. I find it really special. So that question kind of leads me on to another question that I got from kind of similar veins from Evalie and from Kendra from the Balance Skein. They asked me what my thoughts are on sustainability in knitting, fibers I avoid, thoughts on overmaking, and then what my yarn stash and yarn shopping philosophy is. And I really enjoyed this question because I'm thinking about it a lot. I know it's a hot topic in the knitting world. But generally for me in my life over the past like 3 or 4 years, sustainability has become kind of a lot more, has come to the forefront of my mind a lot more. And like, I'm trying to live my life much more sustainably than I used to, not just in my making, but like in my lifestyle and my travel habits. So I try not to drive my car too much. I ride my bike, or I ride transit to work, or, I try not to eat a lot of meat, other things like that. I try to recycle, and I try not to buy things that are in single-use plastic, and just trying to make my lifestyle a little bit more sustainable. And there are a lot of ways to do that in your craft as well. And the thing that I found is often sustainability is also more affordable. So my sustainability in knitting looks like using secondhand or reclaimed materials most of the time. So if you hear me talk about using reclaimed yarn, it's often old sweaters that I find secondhand that I then unravel and then re-knit into things. I think that's an incredibly sustainable way to knit, and it's incredibly affordable. Like if you buy a thrift store sweater for like $5 to $10, you're getting like 400 grams of yarn usually in that sweater, which is enough for you to make a new sweater for only $10 plus the cost of the pattern. That's a really affordable way when like often 100 gram skein of yarn is upwards of $10. So that's one really great thing about sustainability. Or I'll buy vintage yarn, so like other people's destashes, or like from estate sales, or at like clearance places, just yarn that is otherwise could like potentially go in the garbage. And like that is so sad to me to think about yarn getting thrown away. I do the same thing for my sewing practice as well. I use a lot of textiles that I find secondhand. So bed sheets or bed linen, or like bedspreads or curtains, or just like offcuts of fabric. I try to use that instead of buying new, because there's so many beautiful things and beautiful fibers that exist in the world already. I want to use those before I use something new. I do have an accumulation problem, and I think a lot of us feel this way in the knitting community. I have a good sized stash of yarn, and it's grown quite quickly. It grew quite a lot last year, and then when I went on my big trip this year, I bought a lot of yarn, which I think is fine because that was like a once in a lifetime opportunity for me. I don't have any regrets about that at all. But I do have a decent sized yarn stash. The good thing about my yarn stash is that I have plans for a lot of the yarn that I have. I also like that if I can find yarn affordably, and then I have friends who want to knit, I can give that to them, and I don't feel like I spent a lot of money on them, and it makes it more accessible to other people. I'm really happy to share what I have, because I have like a whole needle library of like every needle size you could ever need. I often loan them out to some knitting friends that I have here in real life. Like if they need a 16-inch circular and an 8mm needle, like I have one that I can just loan to them that I'm probably not using at the time. So I like that having a stash makes me able to help others. It's like I have a library basically, which is really nice. I also find having a stash really inspiring, that like I could just start a new project, or if like I had a design idea I wanted to try or something, like I could just jump right in and I probably have something that will work. And I don't feel as guilty about the size of my stash because it is generally not a super expensive stash, and it is coming from a more sustainable place. I don't think anyone needs to feel ashamed about the amount of yarn that they have, especially if they're going to use it. And I don't think you should feel bad if you don't have a stash. Like, it's very personal. Most things about making are very personal. So I'm content with the size of my stash, and I'm happy to be knitting through it. I'm trying to knit through it this year. I want to make use of what I have, and not just let things sit. So that's my stash and shopping philosophy. I do buy yarn, but if I'm buying yarn at a yarn store, it's generally with a pattern in mind. And even when we went overseas to Scandinavia this year, a lot of the yarn I bought, I had a list in my phone of like projects I wanted to make and how much what quantity of yarn I would need to make those projects. So I was buying yarn with projects in mind, which is generally how I try to knit, to keep my knitting practice circular and moving, and so that I'm not just like holding on to things forever. I also, because I have so much, I'm also able to make gifts for people, which is really fun. And it's a great way for me to keep knitting, which is, I'm much more of a process knitter. I just enjoy the process of knitting than I am the product. So I'm able to give things away, which is really nice. So that's my thoughts. I feel like they were a little bit jumbled. If you have any questions about that, happy to talk to you about them. But yes. The next question is from Threads of Time, and I loved this question. She asked, how are my Dooney bags and what is the best style to fit a project in? This question is referencing a video that I have on my channel that I made several years ago. Before I was doing a lot of knitting videos, I was making other kinds of videos on my channel. There are a lot of them that are still there. They're like baking related or beauty related videos that you can go watch if you want. But I did a video talking about my bag collection because I do have quite a large collection of vintage Dooney & Bourke and Coach purses. This was like something that I was this is a collection I was working on when I was in college. And I bought a lot of them. Actually, I bought all of them secondhand, and I have a whole video showing a lot of them. So I thought that was funny that this person had watched that video and then wanted to ask me about it. I think the best size handbag for a knitting project is always a bucket bag. I love a good bucket bag. You can fit so much stuff in there. And, yeah, so I'll show you some pictures, or I'll put a little cutaway of some of my favorite bags to carry knitting projects in. Thanks, Lauren, or thanks. That was a fun question. Lauren asked if I have any abandoned whips. I'm not really an abandoned whips kind of person. I'm more of a frogger. Like, I'd rather frog something and have the yarn go into something else than just let it sit and languish. I also don't have enough needles to let things lay around. I mean, I have a lot of needles, but, I'd rather take the needles and the cables out and use them for something else and have the yarn kind of sit back in my stash, where I can see it and maybe incorporate it into another project. So I'm not really an abandoned whips person. I have some long-term whips, but I am like continuously working on them, even if it's not that much, even if it's just like, I don't know, an inch or two a month, I'm still working on them and they're still progressing forward. So no to the languishing whips. Different people have different workflows. That's mine. And then Lauren also asked where my favorite place to knit is in my new home. I moved to the house that you're looking at right now. I moved here about a month and a half ago now, and it's really lovely. And I'm still kind of settling in. Generally, where I'm usually knitting is on the couch in front of the TV. I'm either watching other people's knitting videos or TV shows. Got lots of favorite TV shows, so if you want me to talk about those, I'm happy to leave some recommendations for you down below. But that's generally where I'm knitting. And then right now you're seeing me in my basement, which I've kind of set up a crafting station in here. And I can show you a little video of what it looks like, but I've got like a desk with my sewing stuff on it, and I've got my yarn stash, my fabric stash, and then this armchair, which I think can be a really nice place to knit. It'll probably be great too in the summertime when it's cold, because it's always cooler down here in the basement. But yeah, generally I'm knitting on the couch in front of the TV. Okay, so that is kind of a wrap on the knitting related questions that people asked me. So I'm going to transition over to the live questions. If you'd like to jet, you're welcome to. Thanks for being here. And I'll see you in my next video. But if you want to stick around, I'll talk a little bit more about myself. Sorry, I'm like out of breath because I've been talking for so long. Okay, so Evalie, Lynn, and Woven Heart all asked me what I study and what I do for work. So if you are new here, I graduated with my master's degree back in June. I was in graduate school for 2 years, and I got a master's in urban planning or city planning, which is the study of cities and how they work and all of the different components that make them work, policies and programs that go into making cities, making them livable, functional, enjoyable places to be. And in my master's, I focused on transportation planning, which is great because I always loved public transit and travel and all of the different systems of transportation that help people and things move around in cities. So that's what I studied. And then I started my full-time job in June, and I am a transportation planning consultant. So I work with different cities and companies all over the US on different transportation related projects. So I work on like bus systems or on commute trip reduction, which is like helping people find alternative ways to get to work besides driving. I work on pedestrian improvements and bicycle lanes and all sorts of transportation related projects. So that's what I do. If you have any more questions about that, I'm happy to answer them, but that is what I do. Very different from knitting, but it is creative in its own way. So I really like what I do. I really liked what I studied. I just really like studying generally. I like to be in school, and I love cities. So it was a great program for me. I really enjoyed it, and I'm enjoying my work. So that is my job. Lynn also asked why I live in Seattle. I am not originally from Washington. I grew up in Texas, which is in the American South, and I lived there for most of my childhood, except for when I was living in Belgium. My dad worked at NATO, and so I lived in Belgium for quite a few years, and that's where I really learned to love transportation because there was so much great public transportation. And then I went to college in Texas, and then went to live in Washington, D.C. for a while to work. And then my graduate school was here in Seattle. So that's why my husband and I moved to Seattle, was for graduate school. But we decided to stay because we really love this city. And I spent 2 years learning about this city, and I know it really well now. So I'm not very eager to leave. I feel like I've invested a lot of time in this city. So I'm happy to be here. We just bought our home. We love the weather. We love the outdoors. We're pretty close. I mean, relatively close. My parents and grandparents live in California, so it's not too far from us, especially compared to Washington, D.C. It was really far for me to get to my parents from there. It's really much closer now. We can drive even if we need to. So there are a lot of reasons that we live in Seattle, but generally we just really like it here. We have great friends. There's so many things to love about the city. So yeah, that's a little bit about where I live. Katie from Songburn Handmade asked how me and my husband met. We met when we were in undergrad, or when we were in college, studying for our bachelor's degrees. We played intramural volleyball together. So that's how we met. And we've been married for almost 6 years now. Lynn asked if I have any Scandinavian lineage, which was a nice question. I do have some Danish ancestry, but very small, and it was never really super my Danish family is not that's not a heritage that my dad grew up with. It's on his side of the family. So I don't really identify with it super closely. I have a lot of English, Scottish, German heritage. But most of my relatives, my ancestors, have lived in the US for a very long time, 200-300 years. So that is my lineage, but I do have, some of my ancestors are Amish, which is kind of a unique Christian religion that's very self-sustaining, and the people are very hardworking, and they make a lot of things themselves. They don't use a lot of modern technology, so they'll sew their own clothes or make blankets or quilts. And growing up around women like that, seeing my extended family was really inspiring to me in my making practice. And it's nice to know that even though I come from places where knitting is a big cultural thing, I come from people where being creative and making things with your hands is a big cultural thing. So creativity and making is a big part of my heritage, just from the women that have raised me and the women that raised my mom and my grandparents. And I come from a long line of hardworking women who make things with their hands, and I'm happy to carry that on, and I hopefully will pass that on to my children. Lynn also asked if I speak any other languages. I do. So when I lived in Belgium, when I was a teenager, I learned to speak French. I went to an international school, and they taught French there. I ended up doing school about half and half in English and French. So I speak French very well. I've been speaking French for half my life now. So I love French. I identify a lot with the language and the culture. And then I also learned Spanish. I speak Spanish moderately okay, not great. And then when I went to college, I started to study Arabic, which I originally wanted to study languages and work in languages. And obviously I don't do that, but I started studying Arabic and I studied it for 3.5 years. It's a beautiful language. It's a really hard language to learn, and I need to practice some more because I've forgotten quite a lot of what I did learn. But I just love to write in the script, and like the culture is beautiful. And so I really enjoyed learning Arabic, and I would love to continue studying that a little bit more. And then my husband is American, but his ancestry is from Italy. And so he speaks Italian. So I started learning Italian last year in 2021, started taking classes when I was at university. I was taking some classes in Italian. And because I speak French and Spanish, I can understand a lot of Italian, but I now have started studying and learning vocabulary and grammar, and so I can get by in some very basic Italian. So I love languages. I find them very interesting and cool, and I love to study them. So I would love to learn more. I would love to get better at the ones that I do know. So if you have any recommendations for knitters or creative people to follow online who speak French or Spanish or Arabic or Italian, let me know. Francesca from The Italian Knitter follows me, and I know I know she watches my videos. So Francesca, if you ever do want to do a video in Italian, I would love to watch it. Okay, got a couple more questions and then we're almost done. Lauren S. asked if there are anything that I'm looking forward to this fall, which I think was a really sweet question. I'm looking forward to it not being warm anymore. I'm looking forward to wearing my sweaters. I'm also looking forward to just doing some smaller trips maybe. I would love to go out to the Olympic Peninsula here in Washington. It's really beautiful out there, and just do like a little overnight camping or hiking or something. I would love to go to Vancouver Island as well, to Victoria in Vancouver Island in Canada, which is really close to us, and visit those places. And then I may end up going to visit my parents in California, just spend some time with them. My company has an office there, so I can just work during the day and then spend time with my parents in the evening, which I think would be really fun. So we may go and do that, but that's really it. I don't have a lot of plans for the fall. I'm just excited to enjoy it. And then Lauren also asked if I have any pets that have ever gotten into my stash or my whips, and I do not have any pets right now. I didn't grow up with pets really, and we don't have any pets. Mostly because we were moving around quite a lot and living in apartments, but now that we have our house, we may end up getting a cat sometime in the near future. And when we do, I will just have to train them to stay out of my things. So yeah, that is it for questions. I really enjoyed chatting with you guys and kind of just like sharing my thoughts on a lot of different things. I hope you guys enjoyed getting to know me a little bit better. If you have any other questions, feel free to leave them in the comments and I'm happy to answer them for you. I just really like getting to know you all in the comments, and I hope you enjoyed getting to know a little bit more about me. Yeah, it was really fun. I made some great progress on my sweater here, and yeah, so I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day or night, wherever you may be. Thanks again for sharing this time with me, and I will see you again in a few weeks for another video. Thanks. Bye.